The National Colonial Farm depicts life on a middling tobacco plantation in southern Maryland circa 1770. But the story of tobacco in what is now southern Maryland goes back thousands of years, and the indigenous communities who first cultivated tobacco here continue to keep that tradition alive. On October 14th, 2021, a team from the National Museum of the American Indian came to visit Piscataway Park to hang their tobacco to dry. We wanted to take some time to talk about tobacco traditions and culture.
Well, tobacco was mainly used for ceremonies. We didn't get into recreational use of tobacco until after the Europeans arrived, and it became a cash crop. Other than that, it was only used for ceremonies, blessings. You have a ceremony. Someone was sick, they would come in and smudge you with the tobacco smoke. I remember as a child, I had severe earaches, and my grandfather was forever blowing smoke in my ear as if that would cure it, but that's what he believed, so you had to go along with it when you were a child, because I suffered greatly from earaches, and whether it helped or not, Granddaddy said it did, so I guess it did.
My name is Mario Harley. I'm with the Piscataway Conoy tribe and a member of the Wild Turkey Clan.
Okay, ni ko hose the winge o Piscataway chaptikong o yaki o kana hagai. Good day. My name is Rico Newman. I am a member of the Chaptico Band of the Piscataway Conoy Chiefdom, Confederacy, Tribe, however you want to describe it.
Hi, my name is Christine Abelow. I'm the lead horticulturalist at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. I actually work for Smithsonian Gardens, but I'm stationed at the museum. I'm responsible for growing all the plants around the museum, including the plants we grow in our traditional croplands area.
Well, yeah, I mean, they would not let you around the tobacco until you reach a certain age. I mean, the tobacco was chopped with some very sharp instruments. It looked like a long scythe that had a sharp curved blade on it. You didn't want to be around because accidents do happen. And if you get hit with one of those things, it would be very unforgiving. It's like these spikes that you guys are using now, which is a relatively current instrument for impaling the tobacco. I remember all of my uncles using a sharp hatchet to split the stalk in order to put it on stalks to go up into the drying barns. So no, we weren't allowed to do those things until we got pretty much in our early teens. Then after the tobacco was chopped, we'd stay a certain distance back from them, and we would take the tobacco, lift it up, and we would spread it out. It would have to lay out for a few days, and for some reason they knew the best time to do it so it wouldn't be rained on. After it laid out for a few days, during that time we would go fishing or jumping in the river and swim or go crabbing and just having a ball. Then we'd go back to the fields and we would take the tobacco and put it on a flat wagon, which would be pulled either by a horse or a tractor. And it was hauled off to the barn, and we had to go in the barn to make sure, chase out any snakes or other critters that might be in the barn that had wintered over in the barns. But we weren't allowed to go up in the rafters. Our uncles and older cousins would take care of that. We would just hand it up once it was on these tobacco stalls, and they would move it up one rafter to another, start at the top and work their way down and hang in that tobacco. I only had one occasion as a youngster to go to an auction, which was in Clinton, Maryland. It used to be a big red barn in Clinton where they did that auction. And listening to the auctioneer sing his song was always pretty much like listening to the guy singing at the rodeos, yippee-yi-yay, you know. But anyway, if you ever heard auctioneers sing their song, you know what I'm talking about. But I always noticed that my uncles and my cousins that grew tobacco always walked away from those auctions very disappointed. They never got the top dollar for their tobacco. Not that theirs was a lesser quality, But you know, and you're talking the 40s and 50s. You're talking the heyday of still colonial thought. Pretty much, the Anglo farmers would always get top dollar for their crop. Native and would get less, and any African American farmers would even get less than that. Not that their crops were inferior, but it was just, some will say, those are the days we lived in. And of course, they continued to do it anyway. Many of them, in order to supplement what was going on, had to take second jobs. Most of them worked in construction because they were all very handy. They built everything. My grandfather built his home from scratch, splitting logs, etc. And so they were very industrious and had the skills to do those things. But it was unfortunate that they could not continue to do what their forebears had done, which was dedicate themselves to farming. But that wouldn't be. And then the next generation moving away, we were always told farming was getting to be untenable, that we should all go to the metropolitan areas and get jobs that would pay us a weekly salary and not have to break our backs and wind up in bad health, not physically, in physical bad health, because farming takes a toll on you physically. But I remember all of my forebears lived to very old, ripe ages, a lot longer than what some of them are living now. So I wonder how much that was feasible. But one thing I attributed to it in that day, all my grandparents and my parents, they ate good food. They ate food straight from the farm. There was no such thing as fast food. It was all slow. Had to take its time to do it. And anytime you went to visit relatives, I don't care where it was, you always go in the back door, right into the kitchen, and the first thing Auntie would tell you, sit down, boy. Have something to eat. I'm not hungry. Have something to eat. You were not going to leave there until you had something to eat. And that was the society that we lived in back then.
I grew up on a farm, and we did the three sisters thing, corn, bean, squash, and we did the cucumbers and tomatoes and watermelons, cantaloupes, that kind of thing. And as a kid, it drove me crazy. We grew so much more than we could ever consume. Mom canned and preserved a lot, but Pop, my father, he had the happiest days is when he could take some of his vegetables and take it into work and give it away. It made him feel good. We had to pick those vegetables, and we wouldn't feel too good about it, but sometimes you pay your dues. But in addition to that, all of that farming stuff, he always had a few plants, one little field all by himself, where he had 5 or 6 plants of tobacco. And we didn't have a tobacco barn, we had a shed, so he would go ahead and grow that tobacco, hang it up in the shed to dry, and then over the years, he came across different people from different tribes, friends, family, he would find some way to offer that tobacco to them. And we always thought it was strange, but that was Dad's field, we didn't have to deal with it, so that was great. And that's the way it was. As a kid growing up, during the summers, my mother's family on her mother's farm, they had large tobacco fields, and we were labor for that tobacco field. And we would go out there in July, August, and spare tobacco, cut tobacco, spare tobacco, hang tobacco, and that was several days in a row. Get a peanut butter sandwich if we were lucky. But that was the sort of the nature of the event, is that we were a labor force and working tobacco from the commercial aspect for our family, my mother's family, to make money. My father raised tobacco to give away for friends and ceremonial purposes. So that was our basic relationship with tobacco. Of course, in the late 70s, they sort of began to realize the impact of cigarette smoking and incentivize farmers to stop growing tobacco. And that relationship sort of went away. My grandmother's farm, they stopped growing tobacco. So those individuals who are now in their young 50s and below, they probably don't have the same relationship that we did in my generation of being out there sweating in the tobacco fields, plucking off those big worms, climbing up into the barns and realizing that there's a snake up there trying to cool off, and the associated shock of realizing that.
Each year we'll pick out plants. We usually start our selections in August, pick out the plants we're going to grow. And this particular year we have a burley tobacco called Kelly right here in this group here that we grew this year. This is a burley tobacco, which means it gets hung up in the barn to dry instead of a flue-cured tobacco. And one of the reasons we grow this one is because it has a very uniform growth habit to it and appearance. It also ripens very evenly. It's more of a commercial variety of tobacco than an authentic or original tobacco, which is the Rustica tobacco. We have grown several different varieties over the years, including Rustica, which is our traditional native tobacco. Kelly, we've grown Virginia Gold, and we just kind of alternate each year. We'll pick out in the fall, well, usually September or August, what we're going to grow for the following year. So next year I'll be growing Orinoco. I'll be doing Kelly Burley again, and I'm also going to do some Rustica, try it again next year. As I mentioned, our greenhouse facility in Suitland, Maryland, actually produces the plants for us. They start them all from seed in February, and then we'll actually plant them outdoors, probably mid-May time frame. And when they're planted outside, it's we're lucky that we have automatic irrigation, so we're able to grow large plants out there, but we have a labor-intensive crop here. It requires a lot of hands-on maintenance with suckering the plants, taking the flowers off of them, topping the plants off, and that's like a weekly chore. I have volunteers and helpers who help me maintain it throughout the season. The tobacco that we grow is all organic. We're not applying any pesticides or chemicals to it, so we're releasing ladybugs and beneficial insects on it on a regular basis throughout the season to keep it healthy and strong. And as we all hear about tobacco being hard on the soil and depleting a lot of nutrients. So I actually have 4 beds in the cropland area, and each year I track it and then I rotate the plants around in the space. So we wouldn't grow the tobacco in the same space next year where we grew it this year. We'll alternate the placement of the plants so the soil has a chance to recover and be productive for other crops. This tobacco is normally ready in fall, about mid-October time frame. It actually starts to take on kind of a golden cast to it from the bottom of the plants, creeping upwards, and that's how you know it's ready. So we usually come in, we'll cut it down. We like to lay it down on the ground in the location where it is. It's called sweating the tobacco. We'll cut it a couple of days ahead of time, maybe a week ahead of time if we have time allows. And then we'll just let it sort of wilt down in place. It doesn't get dry and crunchy, but it becomes very soft and pliable, the leaves. It reacts to the humidity around it. So we've had a lot of cloudy, humid days this past week. So it was perfect for it, allowed it to evaporate some of the water, but not get too crispy. And then after about a week, we'll bring it down here and then hang it up in the barn. And that involves putting it onto stakes and using a spear or a spike mechanism, spiking it through the plants, and then putting 3 or 4 on the actual wooden stake, and then hanging it up in the barn. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks before this will be ready for us to come back and pick it up. I mean, it's best if we can do it on a humid, kind of misty or cloudy day. The tobacco really reacts to the humidity levels, so if we can get it on one of those days, it's just more pliable and less damaging for pulling it down and taking it off the sticks.
I think the first crop was taken down to Carolina, I believe. They have an entirely different way of curing tobacco. I was shocked. They took every leaf off the stalks, put them in burlap bags, hauled them down to Carolina where they were put in big drying bins where they would be cured that way. I'm like, whoa, I've never seen that. But I think the crop after that is when we started bringing it out here to have it dried the old-fashioned way of being hung. pretty much the way the forebears did, only it was hung in the long houses up in the ceiling, and it would be hung in the wigways or wickiups. And it would be cured because that central fire, the smoke coming up in the hound, would cure that tobacco and cure it much differently. I don't think anybody's going to smoke this tobacco like it's barbecue ribs. But the tobacco was pretty much smoked from the smoke coming from the central fires in the longhouses. That whole process doesn't exist anymore. Now we have these barns, and they have these doors on the, I think, doors on the side that come out to allow ventilation. So that's pretty much how it's done now.
The stories that were told to me as a young person, tobacco is a sacred plant to us. It was given to us by the Creator to honor Him and offer in our prayers. So our initial viewpoint and what we grow up with and what we teach our youth is that it's a sacred plant. Unfortunately, it has been distorted by the colonists when they came in, and it led to a major impact to our ancestors' lifestyle in a very negative way. We still utilize tobacco today in our ceremonies. We utilize it when we do our prayers. We teach our youth how to use tobacco in the appropriate way. But it's a very long story. I'm sure as we go through this conversation today, we'll get into a lot of the components.
Many occasions, a group of us would go to places, if there was this talk at the House of Representatives building in D.C., we would go there and other tribes would come in. It was our responsibility as the host tribe to give them tobacco. It has a shared meaning across Turtle Island that when you gift someone tobacco, it has a meaning, very significant in between intertribal and extratribal affairs. Because tobacco had a very central role in the society and in spiritual aspects of native life. I was telling someone earlier, anytime you took anything from nature, didn't matter if it was fruit from a tree, a plant from the ground, whether you grew it or nature grew it, you had to, out of our value system of reciprocity, you had to leave something in return for taking something. And tobacco was the medium for that purpose.
Well, we have our traditional cropland exhibit at the museum. It's on the south side of the museum, and it highlights and features agronomic and food crops that Native Americans grew traditionally and present day. And tobacco is one of those plants that we like to feature each year. We're growing it. It's really an honor to grow it. It's a plant that we carry through drying it and bringing it back to the museum. We have a humidor where we keep it on site, and then we use it for gifts or offerings when leaders and officials come and visit the museum, or when staff go out to visit tribes. They give it as offerings to them in exchange for information and help with projects and things like that, or at special events, powwows, things like that, handing it out to tribal leaders. So I think it's important that we carry on this tradition. It's a real sacred plant, and it feels to me personally an honor to grow the plant, knowing that this is something that's used in many cultures all around the world, throughout the U.S. and then Central and South America as well.
I was talking with Christine earlier. We had the guy downstairs that does things for the curators to build two humidors, two very large humidors. One was taken out to Suitland, the facility in Suitland, Maryland, and the other one was put in the resource center. And after the tobacco had been cured, we'd take it back to the museum and we would destalk it, chop it, put it in those humidors, and we got these bags because you could not use anything, a dyed bag or anything that had, tobacco was sacred. And it would be put in bags that were unbleached cloth with a pull tie on the top. And we would stuff those bags with tobacco, and when tribal representatives would come to the museum, we would always be sure to gift them with a bag of tobacco. And they were surprised and awed and amazed that Eastern people still held that tradition. Even to where, I'm not going to put on blast, the lady that was head of BIA at the time came out, and not only was she amazed that there's still Indians in the East, which is amazing. This is a person that's head of BIA, right? The same position that Kevin Gover held when he was there. But it's not surprising.
We would use tobacco when we have tribal ceremonies when everyone's gathered. We would use tobacco when you wanted to get information from an elder, and you offer him tobacco in exchange for that information. If you were sick, for the medicine people, you would offer them tobacco as payment for their services. When you go to a foreign land, go visit another tribe, you offer tobacco to let them know you come in a good way, that spiritual aspect of tobacco is something that you appreciate and acknowledge and want to give to them in a spiritual manner. When you go to a place today for the first time, you offer tobacco to the ancestors. All those who lived there and traveled there before, to let you know that's their spirits, that you're there in a proper way and want to do things in the right way. So that's sort of the beginning of how we utilize tobacco in our daily interactions long before colonial contact.
But the tobacco, it was certainly a cash crop. The natives got into growing it all the way up into until it became where Maryland stopped supporting the production of tobacco and actually paid people to stop and to go to an alternate crop, which left a lot of those native people who were still engaging in growing tobacco as a cash crop.
When the colonists came, their initial focus was on the fur trade. The story is about religion, freedom, all that stuff. That's when you pull back the layers of that, that's really not much factual detail to it. The Jesuits spent about 10 or 11 years trying to convert our ancestors before they went off and started focusing on the colonists. But what they realized was that the fur market was beginning on its decline here in the Chesapeake Bay area, and they needed another way to generate revenue. And the tobacco market became their primary way of generating cash. There was no currency at the time, so fur was the currency at one time, then it became tobacco. People pay their taxes in tobacco. And the thing about tobacco is it is very harsh on the land and is very labor intensive. It's a 12-month-year responsibility raising tobacco. And labor was always a challenge. So initially the colonists had indentured servants, which came over for a 4 or 5 year commitment, and then they were free to go do their own thing. Then they got into the slavery thing, in which that was a labor force. And while you had your indentured servants and your slaves focusing in on raising tobacco, there was no one left to do the food thing. So our ancestors got contracted by a lot of these large manors and plantations to go out and do the hunting, to go out and do the fishing, to bring in the gathering of those foods that needed to sustain those manors. And that went on for about a good 50 to 70 years. We were living on the manors. The manors got built around us. The Calverts were offering up 10,000, 20,000 acres to their friends, and they created these large manors all around us, which became tobacco farms. Unfortunately, after the Revolutionary War, these manors, these British loyalist manors, got taken by the state of Maryland. They got subdivided into smaller plots, sold off, and the revenue generated from those property sales were used to pay off the war debt, pay off the soldiers. Well, we were living there before the manors. We were living there during the manors. Unfortunately, when they subdivided the properties, we got forced out of that too. So these tobacco farms came in and took over all of our villages that were along the various waterways throughout southern Maryland. And our ancestors had to go ahead and relocate in the areas, the interior of the state, mostly near the swamplands. And then we sort of had to figure a new way to survive in our self-isolated communities. So tobacco was used by the colonists as an economic engine for the colony. And in doing such, that became a major impact to our lifestyles, our village locations. We had to get uprooted and relocate ourselves away. So it's kind of ironic that something that was so important to us as a people became a tool for the colonists to basically drive us off our village areas and change our lifestyles once again. Our people are adaptable, resilient, so we found new ways to survive. In Southern Maryland, the tobacco economy was strong from the mid-1700s through the mid-1900s. And our people did the farming thing to sustain ourselves, as well as a lot of the commercial farming, tobacco farming as well. So the idea that every Piscataway now has a relationship with tobacco is no longer the case. So we have to find a different way to educate our youth about tobacco. Show them that still that spiritual role of tobacco, that need to exchange tobacco and gift tobacco is still very important. When I travel with tobacco. It makes it a little more difficult going through the airport these days with DHS, TSA. They're pulling you over and what's in that little leather bag? And they think they got a big fine and seem kind of disappointed when it's only tobacco. But those are the kind of things I know when I go to California, I want to offer tobacco. When I go to Washington State, when I go to Florida, I want to offer tobacco. So those are that's sort of the way that we were raised in our relationship with tobacco, in that we understand the commercial aspect of it and how it served a need. We understand the historical aspect of it, of how it was devastating to our culture. And we understand the ceremonial aspect, that it was a way for us to communicate with the Creator, and that is the way we still perpetuate it today. It's amazing. Our children are removed from the waterways. Of course, everybody knows that the land taxes and the cost of riverfront, waterfront property is extreme, and the average person is not going to be able to afford it. So our people were forced away from those communities, from that areas, those places where the waters flow freely, and therefore you lose a lot of information and firsthand interaction. The seasonal changes in the waterways, those water plants, those types of food sources, learning the ways of the different migrating fish in and out, the time frame, they don't see it. And unless you're out there experiencing it and understanding and becoming a part of it, then you move on by, and you got to go through other sources. You got to go to elders who did experiences and try to retain that knowledge. So that's a major challenge, getting water plants. Something as the cattails. They grow in sort of tidal water ponds. Our ancestors used that for a whole lot of things. But getting access to it now to teach the next generation is a challenge. The silting of our waterways because of the colonial farming practices. It's hard to get out there into the waterways without sinking 10 inches in mud. So there's a lot of different factors that the colonial impact has caused that has affected the way our youth today interact with our waterways. From a tribal perspective, legacy is strong. As I travel around Turtle Island, which we call North America, Native America has still embraced tobacco. We have that generational pool in which some people got embraced into the commercial cigarette aspect, and our people are trying to disjoin that relationship with smoking tobacco as far as cigarettes and the traditional means. That's been a real challenge. You go back and look at a lot of the marketing of these cigarette companies. There was different types of Indian tobaccos for cigarettes and chewing tobacco and all that kind of stuff. And some people who are removed from their culture would be led to believe that to be Indian, you must embrace tobacco. Well, the answer is yes, but not that kind of tobacco. And those are the kinds of things that has distorted our history and our culture. So the cigarette aspect of tobacco, bad, unproductive, nothing associated with our culture. The focus of historical, traditional tobacco and the values associated with it, honoring, prayer, gifting, those are the kind of things that has still sustained ourselves in our communities across the nation. And I do believe the next generation is also picking that up.
Well, I don't personally have any connections to the tobacco in my past, and I'm not a Native American, but personally, with the tobacco and some of the other crops that we grow, we use our food in the museum cafe there, and the tobacco, of course, we're gifting it out, using it for ceremonies, or traditionally it has multiple uses, whether it's medicinal or recreational, or the gifts and offerings things. To me, it's an honor. I take a lot of pride in the fact that we're able to use these plants. We're taking it full circle. We're starting it from seed, we're planting it, we're caring for it all season, and then we're actually able to dry it and use it. And I just really, it's special to me that we can use this plant and that it's so meaningful to the people who receive it as these gifts or offerings or at the ceremonies. So I personally take a lot of pride in it, and I'm excited that we're able to do this and carry on these traditions and share it with so many people.
A lot of tribes from the plains and the Great Basin and the Northwest come here and are amazed that we still have a tobacco tradition, which I hope keeps going on, and with the assistance of Accokeek Foundation and the Smithsonian, it will keep on keeping on. It's worthy to be continued. And hopefully that soon the school buses will start rolling in here again, and that kids can come here and they can be told some of the story that I'm telling right now about. This is not about Chesterfields and Camels and Lucky Strikes and whatever. This is an entirely different story to be told about tobacco. R.J. Reynolds has nothing to do with it. So anyway, I hope that it endeavors to persevere and continues. And I give much thanks to Accokeek Foundation and to the Smithsonian for their input in seeing that this program continues. We don't say goodbye. We say, well, peace, good day. I hope to see you again.